Please be advised that in order to foster quality discussions in each episode, we will spoil the stories in each game and text we talk about. Good news is, 90% of the titles we cover are old enough that many of you might already know all about them. That said, we do encourage you to play and read before listening. Hey everybody, it's Bryce. Just wanted to add a little note to the front of this episode. I know I included it in the brief update I posted a few weeks back, but I just wanted to apologize for the weird sound quality of my voice in this one, and ask you all to stick through it, as the conversation's still pretty cool and has some nice little fun facts about Raymond Chandler and noir stories along the way. To reframe the recording situation, basically, Caleb already had a studio set up for the Drunken Pen writing podcasts, which we used for the first 3 episodes of Arcade Bookshop. Then I got a USB mic to begin recording from my house with Caleb remotely, and all my tests beforehand went totally fine, sounded great. But something with the recording it remotely with a video chat screwed it up, and it caused my microphone to top out and crackle super badly, which I didn't have in any of my tests before I started recording. But this is the only episode I used that mic on before I returned it to Amazon, so no worries at all about future episodes. They should all sound totally great going forward. So, I'm really sorry about the bad quality of my voice today, but Caleb's voice still sounds top-notch and sexy, so I hope you all still listen and enjoy our conversation about Blackmailers Don't Shoot by Raymond Chandler. This is a gun buddy. It goes boom boom and guys fall down. Want to try it?
Listen here, I'm not a big fan of guns that go boom boom. I'm more of a dancing kind of guy, and maybe we should do the waltz together.
That's what you got?
I don't know. I can't. This is so stupid.
I wasn't expecting that one. That was a little taste.
A little taste of some Raymond Chandler.
Yeah. Some Raymond Chandler from this week.
We'll read a couple lines later on. How about that?
Yeah. This week's story is Blackmailers Don't Shoot by Raymond Chandler. We'll go a little bit more into that. Also, we were just talking a minute ago about how we're goo men.
We're goo men.
Caleb and I took a little visit to Columbus, Ohio together this past weekend, or last weekend. We visited a lovely little store that I had been to for my first time called the Book Loft in German Village. And on our way there, this is a whole day of tales we have. On our way there.
I know where this is going.
Caleb's just telling me all about Columbus, all about Ohio, all about how as soon as you get there, everyone's awful at driving. No offense to any of you Ohio drivers who are very deliberate and careful drivers, but gotta say, as soon as we entered the city limits, a baby mattress just flew right under my car.
Not even a regular mattress, a baby mattress. Thank goodness there wasn't a baby on the mattress. That would have been a whole other escapade.
Thank goodness. And thank goodness it was a baby mattress, because if it was a full-size mattress, I don't think we would have survived that.
No, it would have crushed our bodies as well as our spirits.
Yeah. I think it straddled. I think my car straddled right over the mattress, hooked it up, and then spat it out a few minutes later
into some other poor soul.
Yeah,
that was behind us.
Almost wrecked somebody else.
The mattress that just keeps on giving. You want to talk about boom boom?
And goo. That the mattress was a preface to our goo experience.
That does not sound good.
It doesn't sound good, but it was really good. Caleb introduced me to Ethiopian food. The goo we're referencing are the lovely stews all over the what's that bread stuff called?
I always forget the name of it. It's like a big pancake.
Yeah, it's really good. They're almost like it's almost like crumpet bread, kind of.
Yeah, it's very porous and it's delicious, but it's super filling. And the goo is not really goo. There's a couple of them that could be consistency of goo, but most of it, just stews and different vegetables. But they are all awesome. There wasn't one I didn't like, and there was 10 of them.
Yeah, there were like some curry type things. There was like a cream corn one. One was just like smoky sauteed peppers and stuff. But and there's a lot of it was like bean based, but whew, that was good.
My carrot slushy wasn't the best.
Yeah.
I got a smoothie I let the chef's recommendation of a smoothie, mainly because I didn't really understand what she asked me. So I said, you pick the smoothie, and she came out with a carrot slurry. Just like crunchy chopped up carrots and I think mango maybe, but it just tasted like carrots. It wasn't the best. It wasn't that refreshing.
If there were flavors on the menu, I would never have said just pick one yourself.
There was nothing on the menu. It just said smoothie, and she said, "What kind do you want?" I was like, "I don't know. What do you have?" And I didn't understand what she said, so I said, "You pick. Go ahead. Your judgment is probably best." So she went back and told the chef, "Hey, give him the old carrots we're trying to throw away.
Just dump in the excess of whatever you're making the stews with."
Yep.
We'll call that a smoothie.
Wasn't the worst I've ever had. I've been doing Orange Julius and had a couple bad ones.
I don't know if I've had a bad drink at Orange Julius.
I just named it. That was literally the only smoothie place I could think of. I don't go to smoothie places too often. I'm not a big... Yeah. I like smoothies. I make them at home. But on the road, I'm not spending $20 on a smoothie. That's outrageous.
Yeah.
Preposterous.
But our main destination of the day was the Book Loft in German Village, which was probably the coolest bookstore I've been to. They only have new books, right? It's not used. Anything?
No, I think everything's brand new, but they do have a lot of sales, and if there was used stuff, it would be the outside stuff, but I think that's just overstock.
Yeah. But they had such a cool selection, and I always say, like, the marking of a really great bookstore is how eclectic their poetry selection is, and it was great. I found several things that I had been looking for months. I couldn't find anywhere else. You know, like Barnes & Noble has a decent selection, but it's all kind of like regular stuff or like super classics. Like, so you see a lot of like Rupi Kaur and you know, like Walt Whitman, like Charles Bukowski, you know, the regular stuff. Yeah.
To be fair, you did pick up quite a few volumes of Rupi Kaur.
Not by my own volition. You were very skilled at forcing those into my stack.
Well, when we went, for those who haven't been to the Book Loft in Columbus, Ohio, as Bryce said, it's highly recommended. We stood in line for 30 minutes to get into the place, if that tells you anything. You know, like how many bookstores do you wait in line? But it's set up almost like a maze. They have an actual floor map they give you when you walk in. It's huge. And we probably spent an hour and a half on just one side of the building. But they do post, or they have end caps where they'll have just like random popular books spread throughout. And Rupi Kaur was like on one, like at least one Rupi Kaur book was on every one of those. So every time we walked past, I would just pick one and hand it to Bryce like I found something really cool for him to get. And he's like, God damn it, I don't want this. How many times are we gonna find Milk and Honey on a shelf?
Damn it, Milk and Honey.
It's so stupid.
That place is really cool. They have 32 rooms, and you hear 32 rooms and you think of like a mansion, but it's like it's a big place, but all the rooms are very small. And like Caleb said, it's like a maze. To the point that like sometimes it seems like the exits disappear at times.
We had a House of Leaves moment that was kind of frightening.
Yeah. That was terrifying. The claustrophobia sets in. You're like, the exit, the place we came in at is no longer there. And so we turned around and we're like, wait a second, that's definitely where we came from. And we turned back around and there it was again. And but that aside, it was a really cool store. I came home with like 5 or 6 new books. And most of them were at least like 5% off, which isn't that great. But I got some other cool stuff that was like half off. And I never come home from a bookstore with that many books. So
it's really hard to go in there and not come out with $100 worth of books.
Yeah, well, I only spent like $65 for like 5 or 6 books. That's not too bad.
Mm-mm.
I mean, considering usually a book costs like $15
Yeah.
at least.
Well, they always have
But anyway,
stuff on sale or at least a percentage off. And I'm sure if you live in the area and go there often, they probably have some either a card program or
mhm,
some kind of frequent buyer thing.
yeah. But we digress. Welcome to Arcade Bookshop, where we talk about video games and their literary counterparts for all of you who love to play and to read. This week we're talking about Raymond Chandler's short story Blackmailers Don't Shoot. So, Caleb, why did we choose this book?
Well, I don't know about you, but was this my idea? It might have been my idea.
Oh,
Because
it's not a book, it's a short story. Excuse me.
short story. You can read it within an hour, I would think. I think that's how long it took me. I don't remember. But, sorry, I get in the habit when I read these kind of things, I want to talk real fast and wear my pants up around my nipples. Old-timey detectives, the old private dicks. Which I don't know why you wouldn't, listen to the Deja Vu episode, which is a old school noir story. We had to come up with a old school noir story to go along with the video game story, and who better than Raymond Chandler, one of the greatest noir writers of American noir, I guess.
Yeah, so he's basically one of the fathers of crime noir
The
or
Godfather,
or
if you
detective.
will.
Or the godson, maybe. I actually read that. I think I was going to talk about this later, but I actually read that he was inspired by a couple other people who were really like the father, like the pioneers of the genre.
The old
We can get
pulp
into that a little bit
writers.
later,
Yeah,
but
we'll talk about that later.
yeah, it basically. I mean, if you listen to the Deja Vu episode, it's a pretty simple story, but it's basically about blackmail and some memory loss. So this one follows the blackmail thing
And the memory loss, it's
mostly.
just not the protagonist that has the memory loss.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Well,
Did I totally miss that?
go over, we'll get into it. We'll get into it when we do the story breakdown.
But yeah, we also thought it was cool to choose a short story, or I thought it was cool to choose a short story since Deja Vu was so simple and short. It took us it took me like 5 hours, but it's really only like a 2 hour game. So we don't want to pretend that it's this big complex substance of a video game when it's really just about the puzzle. And I think that's along the lines of what this story is about. And it's also the first story ever published. So it turned out, I think, to be a little bit more complex than I expected, but still not all that complex. Do you agree?
I wouldn't say it's very complex at all.
Well, I'm so glad that we are on the same page about this story, Caleb.
I will say that I didn't solve the mystery like beforehand, though I wasn't really trying to, but often when I read these kind of things, I just tend to solve the mystery. I did not have that with this, but I don't know. That might have just been due to the writing style of this one, because this was his first short story, so it wasn't quite polished like he is in later works.
Right. And I've never read anything else by him, but I felt similarly. So to go over to give a synopsis of the story, you can jump in whenever you want because I'm probably not going to do it very well. But basically, it's about this private detective who it starts out that he is actually blackmailing another woman, Rhonda Farr, and the main character's name is Mallory. And
he's blackmailing a famous Hollywood actress.
Right. And they get involved with some, I guess they're like dirty cops and some like mobster type people. And it's very confusing, we're going to spoil stuff for the sake of getting to an analysis of a whole short story because it's kind of hard not to spoil things. But so
a spoiler word, we should do a spoiler warning for every single episode of Arcade Bookshop because that's kind of the point of the show.
Right. I intend to do that. No, I haven't gotten there yet, but
maybe just a spoiler warning intro for if you hear it on this one, that means Bryce went ahead and did it.
Right. So yeah, there's this blackmail involving like love letters to some other guy, and she's denying that they're real or authentic. And I don't know. I had a hard time. It's hard for me to even summarize it because I had a hard time understanding what was really going on. Do you agree?
I felt there were, and this will go into the analysis, so I'm not going to break it down too much, but there were way too many characters introduced for a short story. There was a lot of back and forth going on, and the way this was written, I often felt, especially at the beginning of the story, I didn't quite know who I was following. It's like, is this Mallory, or is this the crooked cop, or who's beating up who? What's happening? Then once we get into the mobster stuff, and these are all low-rent mob guys. These aren't, like, high-end. I mean, they're rich, but it's not like his later works, you get these big-time stories. Other than the Hollywood actress who's real famous, it's not really that big time of a story. It's kind of sleazy, actually, which is probably why it deals with blackmail. Superficially, it's not actually a blackmail story because we find out Mallory is not a blackmailer. He is a private eye. But the story, the way it unfolds, it is hard to follow at times. And you just kind of have to go with like, okay, now we're going to a random house and there's 6 more people getting shot and punched and hit.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know what's going on, who the bad guy is or what's really happening because they're all kind of bad people, it seems like. Even the detective seems kind of shitty.
Even even Rhonda Farr, the actress.
She was bad. She sucked.
It was interesting. I mean, so like if I gave a synopsis, I would just be like, I would just say like it's about a guy blackmailing someone, and then some people want to kill him, then he wants to kill some other guys later, and then some other guys want to kill him, and then it just goes back and forth.
Back and forth is it.
That's it's like it's like not a complex story, but it's confusing.
Even the synopsis on the Goodreads is terrible.
Yeah.
It just says a black yet oddly tender story of adultery, cruelty, and murder, published posthumously in 1976. So maybe this is his first.
Wait,
I guess I think they meant that it was published in a collection in 1976, but this was his first short story ever published.
Yeah.
Often when these old pulp writers passed away, they would get all their works and they would put them in different collections throughout the years. But they would always say, oh, first published in whatever year that came out. But no, the stories, if you look in the book, it'll actually, I don't know what collection you had, but in my collection, it'll tell you the date of the story publication of like 1940 something or 30 something.
I think it was 1933. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, I want to go into the writing style, and we kind of already mentioned it, but it's like, it's very simple. It has like this slight attitude that you get from the hard-boiled crime noir genre, but it's really mostly just getting from one scene to the next. It's not all that floral. It's like, I mean, probably not at all. You can tell that it's his first, and it probably wasn't his very first story ever, but you could tell it's from early in his career.
It's almost paint by the numbers with how it unfolds.
Right. And it's just got like, it's a little hard to follow, and it has that classic like noir dialogue riddled with innuendo and sarcasm, and which at times made it hard to translate. Like it was almost like the talk from that era, even though it's not all that long ago. It almost requires a little bit of translating, like Googling to figure out what they actually mean. Despite most of it being literal and plain most of the time.
You know, this is actually pretty funny. I don't know. I talked about this with my buddy Spencer, because you brought this up, that I have a habit every time I have a collection in my hand and I open it up to a random page. It's either really gross or like something like it's just I have a habit of picking like the best sections. I just opened this up randomly, and the first line that came out to me is your introduction line, the boom boom.
Really?
Because I just wanted to read a little piece just to give the folks a feel. So I'll read the paragraph before, because where Raymond Chandler in the noir genre shines is usually the dialogue and the descriptions. You got a lot of guys with hawk noses and bushy eyebrows, and he's wider than a car or something like that. So I'll read this real quick, just because it came up in the introduction. I don't know. It's very odd that happened to come up on that. It's page 10 in my collection. The man who held the gun was very big and broad. He had a shapeless felt hat on the back of his head, and an indistinct overcoat hung away from his stomach. Dim light from a high-up, narrow window outlined bushy eyebrows, a hooked nose. There was another man behind him. He said, "This is a gun, buddy. It goes boom, boom, and guys fall down. Want to try it?" Mallory looked at him mentally and said, "Grow up. Grow up, flatty. What's the act?" There was a lot of that dialogue I didn't understand what it was supposed to mean. But it's funny because like how I just mentioned a hook nose and broad shoulder, whatever, like the bushy eyebrows. I did not read this before I said that. And that's exactly what comes up because this is, like I said, not just the actions very paint by the numbers, but the writing. This was the most basic, and maybe it was just because he was an early creator of the genre, but the writing is so basic that every stereotype or cliche I could think of in my head is in like every page of this. Like just all the descriptions. Right. And they're not very, I wouldn't even say extensive. They're just not very good. Like he's just big and broad. Like that's not very creative at all. Like the hawk nose and the bushy eyebrows, it's not very creative detail, especially because I feel like that came up multiple times in the story.
Yeah, and like I don't know the history of this, but when you know how there's like a lot, like tons and tons of genre fiction now. Do you know when that started? Like, because it seemed, I mean, I'd imagine before. I imagine for a long time it was just like writing was writing, and then it must have at some point started to like categorize and split up. And I was wondering if like maybe it almost seems like this is one of the first times of that happening, and they started to realize like this is a thing that we need for the zeitgeist, but they didn't really know. It's kind of like a simple idea, so they all started kind of doing it the same way, talking about things in similar way, because it's like the settings are always very along the same lines, and the characters are always like you said, they always describe them very similarly.
Same archetypes, yeah.
And so, yeah. So I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm thinking too hard, but
in the specific genres really started in the 20s and 30s in the U.S. Because if you go back to the 1800s, we had like the Penny Dreadfuls. Then you had a lot of Gothic literature was coming out in those, and a lot of them were terrible, some were good. But in the 1920s and 30s, especially when the Depression started, it was almost a resurgence of like, you know, the real cheap garbage. They called them the pulp books, you know, because they were made of like recycled pulp, terrible paper. But that's when the genre stuff started kicking off. So you had your westerns, you had your I'm trying to think of some actual specific titles like eerie, creepy, weird. Some of those might not be. I know Erie's one. But they had like they would publish the horror stories were big. I wish I could, because I watched a documentary on this years ago. I wish I could remember the publisher, but they actually, it might have been in the late 40s or 50s where there was a crackdown on, it was like a censorship deal that happened where they started cracking down on what you can have in those kind of books. So all the horror stories became real watered down. The crime noir stuff became real watered down. And I think that's when you had like the westerns that had more of a resurgence in the 50s again. But regardless, so you had Raymond Chandler, Robert E. Howard, H.P. Lovecraft. These guys made their money in the pulp market, so they were writing stories weekly and getting paid probably not very much. So they had to constantly put out work. And when you're writing that style, it has to be formulaic because you need to get it to the printer as quickly as possible. So a lot of these guys, their editors shaped their style of writing. So they wrote however they wrote. You take Robert E. Howard, for example. He has a very specific writing style, but then the editor comes in and is like, hey, we need to hit all these beats in this story. We need to have the story set in, you know, whatever setting the Conan universe is set in, and it has to be familiar. So you get a lot of stories where the descriptions, if you read the collections like the Conan collection or these Robert E. Howard noir collections, a lot of the descriptions are the same or similar throughout because it's formulaic. He has to get these out real quick. You don't have a lot of time to come up with very creative stuff. So you get this, like how I said before, a paint by the numbers. It is paint by the numbers because you need to get the work out there. So you have to get the story done as quickly as possible, keep it entertaining, but it's supposed to be a fluff read. It's not supposed to be something you read deeply or get something from. It's just supposed to be a fun story. The detective genre is probably a little more complicated because you have to have a mystery, so that's probably harder to write. But at least the language could be even cheaper than the fantasy or the sci-fi stuff. So when you get a Raymond Chandler, he could have these very basic descriptions, but because the action and the pacing is so fast, you don't mind. You just can read through it. So yeah, that was the history though of like the pulp stuff. Is these guys are writing weekly stories, and that's how they make, not even just make a living, just to get by. Because none of them were doing very well. I don't know Raymond Chandler's history. I think he was one of the few that actually broke out into novels. So he had the Philip Morrow, which is this Mallory character seems to be a precursor to him because he's written the same way. The smart.
Yeah, and actually, they did an episode of I forget what the show was called, but they actually made an episode of whatever it was where they used this story and and the main character was Philip Marlowe instead of Mallory.
Oh, so okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's basically how it came to be. He was able to break out and do novels, and he became a serialized novelist, which I don't know if the original novels were published in magazines. A lot of times that was the case. I never really looked into it too hard, but I think because you have the same thing with Ian Fleming's James Bond, the spy detective genre. Stuff like that, it was always fun. It's just they all kind of read the same. Robert E. Howard was probably the outlier where he was the most literary outside of H.P. Lovecraft, but he was like so dense that it was like garbage, not garbage, but just not an enjoyable read. Purple prose, if you will. Robert E. Howard, though, he had the fine line of he could be literary but still have the entertainment value that you want. And Raymond Chandler does hit those notes when he gets to the novels. We read The Big Sleep, and it was written a lot better than this one was.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because while this story was fun to read in a lot of ways, I was very aware that it was. I mean, I probably did it to myself because I knew ahead of time that it was his first story ever, but I was very aware of that. It just really felt like someone's first story or one of their early stories. So I was going to ask you how The Big Sleep compared to it.
Yeah, the Big Sleep's very polished. But even though I remember when we covered the episode on my podcast, it was I think it was one of those things where there's a few parts where I don't really know what's happening, or I don't know who's speaking, or I don't know who's doing, performing the action right here. And that probably just comes down to, one, he's probably on a deadline again, but mainly I think it's because he has so many characters involved and the action's so fast-paced, it's probably hard to follow. Even when you watch some of the old noir movies, you get lost in them, and they're not complex stories, but just the way it unravels, you'd be like, wait, who's that guy again? What's he doing here? I thought he was dead. What the fuck's happening? So you get that a lot, but when you read that in written form, it sucks because then you're really lost.
Yeah, and I definitely felt that way in the story.
Did you happen in your research find how old Raymond Chandler was when this story was published? Like his first story?
I think I did, but let me see. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I think he was in his 30s. I found out that he was in World War I from 29 to 31, like age 29 to 31. So it was sometime after that because the noir and hardboiled detective genre didn't come around until after World War II, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So he must have been in his 30s or 40s, I would guess. But real quick, you mentioned that these guys probably didn't make much off these stories, but I did find that Raymond Chandler got this story published and was paid $180 for his very first story. And for those of you that don't feel like researching the conversion rate from 1933 to now, that would be about $4,000 for a short story. And also, if you guys don't know, it's hard to get a short story published, let alone get paid for it, let alone make more than $5 or $10 today. If I made $180 off of anything, that would be awesome. The best day of my life.
To put that in even more context, there were a lot of novelists at the time that would be lucky to get $4,000 for a novel, let alone a short story.
Real?
They didn't get paid a lot. Your Hemingways and your Joyces and your Fitzgeralds did, But when it came to just a regular novelist, you weren't getting a lot of money because people just. Well, I mean, novelists it was more difficult because mainly it was more of the academic and high society crowd that read that stuff. But even like the pulp stuff, what did a pulp magazine cost back then? Like a penny, maybe a nickel. So you're going to pay a guy $4,000 and the magazine sells for 5 cents. That's not a good deal. That's terrible.
Right. Yeah, that's just, that was remarkable to me. There's actually, I also found out that there's a difference between, you probably know this already, but I found out there's a difference between like crime noir and a hard-boiled detective. And I think the difference is that crime noir, of course I didn't keep my notes on this here, but I think crime noir generally is expected that it's just going to be dark, everyone is going to be shady, and at the end you're not guaranteed a happy ending.
Yep, that sums it up pretty succinctly.
While like the hard-boiled detective genre, separate from this, you can typically expect that the hero is going to come out clean at the end. Like you're pretty much promised something happy at the end. I think that's correct.
Yeah, it's more of one, the mystery gets solved cleanly. And it's more of not a happy ending always, but yeah, there's like usually the good guy does okay, or he gets the girl or something along those lines. Whereas the crime noir, you think of like, and I know we're getting a little confusing because we have the cyberpunk noirs and stuff, but like your Blade Runners, ambiguous ending. You get your even Chinatown, I don't know if that's considered a noir, but that did not have a clean ending. Most of the noirs I watch don't have a clean break at the end where it's just like everything's happy and we go away, mystery solved. No, it's usually like, oh, we solved the mystery, but everyone died. That wasn't good.
Yeah, like this story, you're kind of left with, you get the information that Mallory isn't actually the blackmailer, so he's like your hero, but at the same time you're left with this feeling like he doesn't really care about anything. He's just trying to get his $10,000 or whatever he was promised.
And it's interesting that Raymond Chandler went that route. Maybe it was because he was first, I just looked it up, by the way, of how he got into that. Into writing. He wasn't a writer. He just was, I think, a drunk, and he just was on hard times and wanted to make money, so he started writing these stories. So it might explain why he introduces our character as a villain, our potential hero, and doesn't reveal that he's the hero until some pages later. It might have even been a good while, from what I remember, like 10, 15 pages later, before you find out, he's not actually a blackmailer, he's a detective.
Yeah.
Was it halfway that you find out he's actual detective, or more than halfway? I forget.
It might be more than halfway, because like I went into it expecting that he was, assuming that he was, but I don't think I think it's like 3/4 of the way in where he's talking to Rhonda Farr again after he like rescues her, I think, and she ends up actually using the term private dick.
Yeah.
And I was like, no way.
I told you, always private dick. It's always the funny dick.
But yeah, so Raymond Chandler was fired from the Dabney Oil Syndicate, where he was an accountant and eventually vice president, because of alcoholism and not showing up. And
that'll do it.
After that, then the Great Depression aggravated his finances, and he resorted to writing. Wouldn't that be nice if you could resort to writing? I would love to resort to writing.
I need to make some goddamn scratch, and these publications, they'll publish anyone. Give them $4,000 for a nice detective story.
Yeah.
Let me just knock one out real quick. That story was first published that story is first published in Black Mask, by the way, and there's no other information on anything about it other than he got paid a lot of money. Like, I don't understand. I want to know the backstory real bad. Oh, he got paid such an astronomical amount of money in a random... I mean, Black Mask was one of the most famous pulp magazines at the time, but they could not have been making that much money to pay a guy $4,000.
Yeah.
Or $180 in the third.
Right, I was going to say $180. But still,
I don't know, unless I don't know. I'd be curious what they actually charge for that magazine, but it couldn't have been more than what you said. I mean, not much more. I don't know if you can find that out, but
I'm gonna do some looking here.
Yeah, but I mean, if it was as popular, if the genre was as popular as it was at the time, it was definitely still in the early stages. Because it was like after the Depression and World War II. I guess this was when people were starting to feel disillusioned and no longer believed in clean, happy endings. That's when people started writing this stuff and making movies about this stuff, where it was like everyone realized the reality of, like, the gravity of reality after the war, after a war like World War II was. And just like, I don't know, it just, everything started getting like shadowy and depressing.
That happened in the 70s as well after Vietnam. If you notice, like the movies like Taxi Driver and stuff, everything got really gritty and awful. That seems to follow up war to a degree, other than World War II, where we had, it was a little, I guess it was in the 50s, but we had that brief Leave It to Beaver era that everyone was really happy, but it was like artificially happy. I got some information on your Black Mass price here, though. Okay. I had to go by the images and just look at the cover prices. This is very interesting. So in the 1920s, the cover prices on a lot of these magazines, and it has the Canadian cover price for most of them, which is, I don't know why, 25 cents, which means it was probably cheaper in the U.S. That's usually how it goes. And then once we get to the 30s, it drops down to 20 cents, and it seems the U.S. price for the most part in the 30s was 15 cents a magazine. So how many magazines do you have to sell to get to $180? That's a lot.
That's math that I don't know how to do.
I feel like Raymond Chandler could have outright bought a house with what he got paid for that short story.
Honestly. You know what, Caleb? Go ahead and find out how much a house cost.
All right.
Back then.
Oh, dude. A new house. Now, this might be back then. I'm not sure if it has the conversion. I'm going to read this. A new house had a price, this is 1933. A new house had a price tag of $3,900, which sounds attainable given that the average income was $1,731 per year. A new set of wheels would set you back $860. A movie ticket was just 25 cents, blah, blah, blah. So let me do the conversion on that and see how much Raymond Chandler could have put down on his house, let's say. But that's not a lot of money.
Yeah. No, I was also going to say, it's funny that this was one of those eras that got real dark in their content, because the dialogue is still so like funny and phony, like while they're trying to get real about shit. Mm-hmm. they start with a silly slang, and in the movies they have the mid-Atlantic accents, and like this whole, it's like so unreal. And like this whole story, everybody is baby, and all the cops are coppers, and shit like that.
But again, at 1930s, I mean, other than the other writers at the time, this wasn't well established that this is this is how we talk in this genre necessarily. So they're kind of making it up at the time. I mean, I'm sure some people were writing coppers and baby and all that stuff, but it's just like they all came out. I was like, yeah, this is what works. This is what we do. That was a house in 1933 was $71,000 in today's money. So Mr. Raymond Chandler had a nice little down payment on it, but he would not have been able to buy a house outright. But still, $4,000 for a story would make my life. I'd be so happy.
You know what? It sounds like he and his wife were kind of sickly. I don't know if you read any of that.
Everyone was sickly back then.
That's probably true. But so I found out that he had eczema so bad he had to wear gloves to type.
Ooh, really?
Yeah. He also...
Was it the chronic drinking?
Probably.
Just straight liquor all the time, not even beer, just liquor. He probably just drank bathtub gin. You have to remember, this was like Prohibition was the 20s when he was drinking hard, so he came of age during bathtub gin and bootleg whiskey. Who knows what they made that shit with?
Right.
Turpentine.
Gross. Yeah, and he ended up dying of pneumonia. And then his literary agent inherited his estate.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I forget what was wrong with his wife. I didn't write it down, but she had issues for a long time, it sounds like.
She was married to Raymond Chandler.
That might do it. I guess we can break into whatever analysis of the story that we can, whatever is actually possible. But we already said, but my first note in the analysis that I had a hard time. I just couldn't figure out. I don't think I fully understood what happened until I read the synopsis. Like not the synopsis, but like the summary of the whole story. Like, did you get the letter thing?
So he threatens her with these letters that exposes an affair she had with a well-to-do, was he a lawyer or something? But then he ended up becoming like not a petty criminal, but like a petty mobster kind of guy, like a wannabe mobster.
Mm-hmm.
So if she was found out to be in love with this fella, her career would be ruined because it's not a good look. Something, flappers and dresses, I don't know. There was a fight with a little Spanish guy at the bar at the beginning I really enjoyed. But then anyway, we got the most dickhead cop there ever was, who ever existed, was in this story. I hated every moment until he got shot to death. He was just such a jerk. I forget his name, but he was a jerk. I don't even know if he had a name. He might have just been Copper, but he was a jerk.
McDonald?
It might have been McDonald. Just an angry Irish asshole. But he...
yeah.
You had the crooked cops. There was so much going on, but essentially you get the... Remember when I said about the memory loss? I think there was a scene in the house where the girls were drugged, and they supposedly couldn't remember what happened, so Mallory couldn't get in trouble with the cops, but then the cops find out he's a private dick, so they, like the good cops, I guess, the detectives, they don't care anyway or something. But it was because the crooked cops got shot and killed. Well, the one crooked cop got shot and killed in this house. They had to... like Mallory would have gotten in big trouble if he was involved in that, but because the woman, she couldn't remember the one lady that was there because she was drugged or drunk or something. Mm-hmm. Again, it was kind of confusing how it went down, but then the letters apparently were phony. Then we find out, I think the letters were real. And then the most hilarious scene was, I think, in the house when that lawyer guy or whatever he was that was in the letters that the actress was in love with, supposedly, comes in with his tall, gangly self and just has a big old shootout with everybody, and then he dies a cool death. And it was like, what the fuck was the point of all this? There was like nothing was solved well. It's a noir story, so nobody left happily. And Mallory's just like, I'm going to go back to Chicago. This place sucks. Well, you should have stayed in Chicago. Why'd you come all the way to Chicago for this? I forget who hired him. And he got shot too, I think. I think he got hurt, and he was on a cane or something at the end, but it was very muddled, and it wasn't a very good mystery.
I don't know if you said this in your explanation just now, but I read the summary, it sort of making sense to me. So I think, the guy's name who is in the letters that Rhonda supposedly had an affair with is Landry.
Yeah.
And I think the idea is that Landry hired Mallory to blackmail Rhonda to somehow like scare her into being with Landry again.
Okay.
I think that's basically what it was. Which, like, now that I'm saying it, doesn't make any fucking sense. But I know that Landry hired Mallory. But it's also like I think the problem I had is that everything you hear, you kind of question whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I think at one point it suggests that Landry hired Mallory, but I was like, I'm so confused because there's multiple copies of these letters, and everybody's lying. I just couldn't get the facts straight.
And it's not like they had copy machines back then, so somebody wrote all these letters, and I found that the writing was just far too clunky at certain parts to really follow what was going on. Like, there was an office shootout at one point where Mallory is seeing this big shot Gambino guy or something, and some other guy comes in with a shotgun and blast away, and then he gets shot, and then there's another guy there, but then he's not there. I was like, woohoo! Well, I had no idea what was going on. And then Mallory just ends up leaving. I was like, okay, this is fucking stupid. I don't know what's happening or what the point of any of this is. It was just like, very first story. And honestly, if this came out today, nobody would publish it other than like some random online literary place. Like no respectable journal would publish, like a crime journal would publish this story because it's just not that good. To be fair, I gave it a 3 out of 5 because it was still entertaining. There was still action. I liked the action. So I still liked it enough, but if I didn't know this was Raymond Chandler and I read this, I'd be like, that's poop. I'm not a fan of that too much. Won't read any more of that guy's work. He'll never be anybody.
Right.
Never make $180 off of this story.
Yeah, I'd probably I'd rate it around the same, like 2.5, 3, because it just, like, I was having fun with it at first, and then the longer it went on, I didn't even realize how long it was at first until I got a few pages in and I checked it. But so I read it, to be fair, I read it from for free on the internet. I don't know. So my pages were, it was like 30, like 8 by 11, 8.5 by 11 pages. So yours is probably like 60 pages. 55. Yeah. So if that story came out today, they wouldn't let it be half that length.
No, it didn't need to be. Could have cut out whole scenes and it would have been fine.
Yeah.
Well, it sucks because the way it opened, because when you first met, or I first told you I started reading it, I was really enjoying the opening. Like, it was just action-packed. It was fun. It had all the noir stuff I liked. And then it just slowly devolved into just like, oh, what happens next? Let's see. They should go to a house and people should get shot. It felt like Raymond Chandler was just kind of winging it. I don't think he really had a plan for this story too much. Even like the actual mystery that was getting solved really wasn't a mystery. It was like at the beginning you find out kind of what happens. It's like, oh, the letters are real. That's it. Well, it's solved. Mystery over. And I think Mallory mostly understood that it was like he had the information, so I don't know what he was doing.
Yeah, and then like it was about like halfway or a little over halfway through, the story was over and it just kept on fucking going.
Yeah. More people kept getting shot for no reason.
Yeah, I remember feeling like there was already a shootout. We already know what the letters are about and where they came from. I think. And then so like all these key points, like key events already happened, and I was reading it and I was like into it and it was starting to wind down, and then I realized that I was only like halfway or 3/4 of the way through, and I was like, oh my god, he's gonna keep talking.
Yep.
And then there was another shootout and more conversations with Rhonda Farr. And then there's that weird thing that probably happens in all of these where he kisses her for no apparent reason.
Didn't make any sense why he kissed her. Didn't even like her. And then you know what else I didn't understand? Or why she would kiss him back. And what else I didn't understand is why there were so many like hatchet-faced gingers. Like, I swear at the beginning of this, like 5 different guys were just they had the same descriptions. They were just all these older redhead guys, slightly receding hair. Yeah. Because there was the guy that was... Like the McDonald cop, I'm pretty sure it was a Ronald McDonald. He had I think he was a redhead, which makes sense, I guess, if he's Irish. When they were in the first house or safe house, office, den, gambling place, I don't know. Some guys were playing poker. You're made to believe they're big shots, but I didn't know what was happening. And then somebody got shot, and I didn't know what was happening. And then there was just this old redhead guy in the corner that just looked angry. He looked angrily throughout the whole book. Like, they would keep coming back there, and it's like, oh, the redhead guy's angry in the corner. Like, who is the redhead guy? What is his purpose here? Why is he angry? Did he get shot? Is he tied up? What? He just was laying in the corner all the time.
Yeah,
he's just angry.
He was that one that didn't have a name, right? He was
just a redhead.
Got tied up, and then you found him again later in the book or later in the story.
Still angry looking.
He still didn't have a name. Yeah.
And still tied up, but he served no purpose, and he just kept coming up. And I was like, why? Why? No, there were so many people that had red hair. There's not that many gingers in California. It's hot.
And like you said, just too many people. Just like too many for a short story. But, I mean...
I think every room he went into had 5 characters that had descriptions.
Yeah.
It was not necessary to have that many people in every single scene.
Right. So, I didn't fully enjoy it. coming from 2023. But even though we're rating it what we are, I wouldn't turn anyone off from it, I guess, because it's still kind of cool to read it for historical context, I think. And also to see how, like, if you get into someone like Raymond Chandler or any of the other people, like, I think the guys who he was inspired by were I have their names, James M. Cain and Dashiell Hammett.
I know Dashiell Hammett, but I don't know the Kane.
Yeah, I think Cain is the big one, like the main pioneer of the genre.
Never heard of him.
So, yeah, it's just cool to, like, it'd be interesting to see, like, what they're writing at the same time that he's writing this, being inspired by them. But it's still worth reading. It's still fun to read, regardless of, because because we know it's like a pulp story.
Yeah,
and it's not supposed to have this great deep meaning. It's just, I don't know. We've all watched stuff like this if we haven't already read stuff like this, and it was just something fun to read to go, and it was very fitting for after playing Deja Vu.
Well, when you read this story or any of these stories, really, you have to remember the audience at the time that was reading these stories. Who was buying these 15-cent pulp magazines? Teenagers, maybe young kids who were able to get their hands on it, and at best, like, young men who maybe weren't big readers. So that's why the language is so basic, why the story is mostly action, why the plot doesn't really matter too much. It's because the people reading these, even if there were adults reading them, they're probably reading them on their lunch break from the construction job. They were just sitting around because they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have TV really. They had radio, but they probably weren't listening to that at the job site, I would imagine. So the people who were reading these were more of like blue collar guys and probably teenagers, young kids.
Yeah, I mean, if you advertise it, like if it was a movie, and you listed off the main points of the content of the story, you would be like, hey, this has affairs, sex, money, drinking, standoffs, double crosses. That's all stuff that kids want to watch.
Yep, it's fun. It's action.
Right.
It's adult, especially if you're a kid and you read this. This is an adult story. It feels like you're reading something you're not supposed to,
Yeah. Right. I have one question that I don't think I could even figure it out on the internet, but I'm wondering if there's a connection to Deja Vu here. Do you know what shot of M is? I think that's what they gave the women that were drugged.
Shot of
but
M
I couldn't figure out what it
could have been morphine, or there was another one that made you like black out, but I can't remember what it is. But I want to say it's probably morphine. I think that was popular during the time, because wasn't that the big thing in World War I? You give people as morphine. Probably should look that up. Might be talking.
Yeah, but with that, I don't know what that would. Yes, but I don't know if that would do what it did. And I was wondering, because there was an M drug that it just occurred to me as we were talking here that I think that's the drug that caused the memory loss in Deja Vu.
Yeah. Morphine addiction was very high in the 1930s.
Okay.
'cause that was a weird name for that drug in the Deja Vu, but it might have been that. 1930s memory loss drugs. Let's see what we got here. Bryce. Alzheimer's, no. Crocodile, no. This is not what I thought it would be. It was probably a made-up drug. There probably was no memory loss drug in the 30s.
Yeah. You take something called there's a drug in Deja Vu called Medrazine, but I think that's like an allergy pill.
Medrazines, yeah. Nausea tablets. Allergy, yeah. I'll say for argument's sake, it was probably morphine. If you take enough of it, I think you just kind of pass out. Because, well, in the context of this story, it wasn't to make her, any memory loss or Deja Vu it was, but in the context of this story, it was just used to basically drug the women or men or whoever they're drugging, so they just kind of pass out or are incapacitated in general. So morphine would obviously do that, and it wouldn't cause like it was used for pain relief, so it wouldn't cause them any physical pain. So it was ideal because then it could just be passed out in the corner somewhere. Because that came up, I think, in The Big Sleep and probably a lot of these noir stories. It was just shoot them up with morphine and then they'll pass out and be done with it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because what need would we have for a memory loss drug in this story? Not much of one. Though what need would we have for morphine and deja vu? Maybe it would make you loopy, and then they could shoot you up with the memory loss drug. I don't know.
You did find out in the game exactly what they gave you because you had to take the antidote for that drug. I don't remember what it was though.
I didn't look it up to see if it was a real drug either.
Yeah, I don't think that game is very scientifically accurate.
I like the story in that game better than the story in this short story.
Yeah, and it was more fun because you got to play it.
Yeah, maybe the story would be more.
Which is why video games are cool.
Cool,
and so are books. Do you have anything else to say about this story?
Give it a read if you like Raymond Chandler or crime noir, because you get to see the roots of one of the greatest noir writers, but don't think it's going to be something spectacular because it's his first published work. And from a guy who just started writing in his 30s, it's kind of interesting to see how far he came. But I think a lot of writers at the time were just picking up the pen before they were even writers just because they wanted to make money. Didn't care about the craft or wanting to tell stories. They just wanted to make money. And you know what? If it made entertaining work, fine. But it's a different look at the world of writing because we always think of artistes, people who craft these lovingly artistic works for the generations. No, these guys didn't care about that. They just wanted to make a couple cents.
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing to learn that, but it's true.
Well, it is what it is.
Guys like this in the genre area. So stay tuned for our next episode when we'll be talking about the PlayStation 1 classic, Final Fantasy IX, which is one of my favorite games of all time. And in the episode to follow, we're going to be talking about Neil Gaiman's American Gods. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to follow or subscribe. And as soon as we establish a social media presence, be sure to follow and watch for us there. We'll probably have that information in the show notes by the time this goes up. And you can look for our playing and reading schedule in the show notes as well, so you can play and read along. If you have any game and book recommendations, we finally got an email set up for the show, so you can shoot us a message at arcadebookshop@gmail.com. Isn't it nice that I got an email as clean as that, Caleb?
That is pretty professional. I like it.
arcadebookshop@gmail.com. So you can look for that in the show notes. And do you want to tell us about your stuff?
If you just like writing in general and want just more book-specific talk, you can check out the Drunken Pen Writing Podcast, which I host. You can follow us at DPW Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Hey, why not check us out on YouTube as well? We don't have videos really because we don't record the podcast video, but we have the audio on there, which for some reason people like to listen to on YouTube over the podcast apps where we can be found on all of them. But yeah, if you want some more book talk, where Bryce has been on there as well, too, by the way, folks, is he is a writer and a poet, and he has read some poetry on my podcast, so you should probably check that out as well.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, also, just a little note for this episode. Caleb has this great studio at home, and he has great equipment, and that's where our first couple episodes were recorded. We're trying out a thing where we're doing it remotely. I got some of my own equipment, but I'm still trying to get more set up here. So if there's any variation in the sound quality, forgive us, but hopefully it sounds great regardless. And thank you so much for listening, guys. Please do yourself a favor. Stick a controller in one hand and your book in the other.